Strait of Hormuz is a pitch-black corridor where the world's energy pulse beats through a narrow, dangerous vein. It was exactly 4 minutes past 2 in the morning when the silence of the Persian Gulf was shattered, not by an explosion, but by the high-pitched, mosquito-like whine of 12 Iranian-made Shahed-300 suicide drones. They moved like a coordinated pack of electronic wolves, closing a lethal, suffocating circle around a lone American AH-sixty-four Apache Guardian. In a reinforced command center carved into the cliffs of Bandar Abbas, an Iranian brigadier general leaned forward, his fingers gripping the edge of a mahogany table. His eyes reflected the cold, flickering blue light of the tactical monitors. He was smiling. To him, the mathematics of the moment were simple and absolute. 12 state-of-the-art, AI-integrated drones against one solitary helicopter. He believed he was about to record the most significant humiliation of the United States military in the year 2026. He didn't just want a kinetic kill, he wanted a global spectacle. He wanted the world to wake up to footage of the pride of American aviation burning in the oily, black waters of the Strait. The Apache pilot, Major Elias Thorne, felt the low-frequency vibration of the rotor blades through his spine, a familiar hum that usually signaled dominance. But tonight, the air felt different, thicker, charged with a hostile intent. He knew the swarm was there long before his tactical suite screamed a formal warning. Inside the cockpit, the dim green glow of the night vision system illuminated a face that showed no trace of panic, only a calculated, icy focus that comes from a decade of hunting in the dark. Thorne didn't reach for the radio to beg for carrier support from the USS Abraham Lincoln. He didn't bank away in a desperate attempt to find cover where there was none. Instead, he did something that caused the Iranian operators hundreds of miles away to catch their breath. He leveled the nose of his $60 million machine directly at the center of the swarm and increased collective pitch. Behind the closed doors of the Iranian bunker, the general's smile began to flicker like a dying candle. He watched the digital telemetry as the Apache did the unthinkable. It didn't behave like a trapped animal. It behaved like a challenger entering the ring. The general barked a sharp command to his lead operator, his voice cracking with a sudden, unexplained tension. He realized in that heartbeat that he wasn't looking at a victim. He was looking at a predator that had just decided it was time to feed. The air in the Strait grew heavy with the smell of ozone and the looming shadow of a disaster that the Pentagon in Tehran had spent decades trying to avoid. This was the moment the trap was supposed to spring, but as the first drone locked its infrared seeker onto the helicopter's exhaust, the Iranian commander felt a cold, primal shiver crawl down his spine. He had made a mistake, a massive, terminal mistake, and the price of that error was about to be paid in fire. To understand why the Iranian command believed this was their moment of total victory, one must look at the cold, hard evolution of the AH-64 Apache Guardian in the year 2026. For decades, the Apache had been the undisputed king of the battlefield, a flying tank that had turned the deserts of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan into graveyards for its enemies. But by the middle of this decade, a new narrative had taken hold in the halls of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. They believed the age of the heavy, expensive attack helicopter was over. They saw the Apache as a dinosaur, a relic of a bygone era of conventional warfare that could be swarmed, blinded, and brought down by a handful of cheap, plastic drones guided by artificial intelligence. The Iranians had spent 5 years perfecting the Shahed-300. These weren't the slow, buzzing lawnmowers that had cluttered the skies of Eastern Europe years prior. These were sleek, carbon fiber predators equipped with frequency-hopping mesh networks and low-light optical seekers that could communicate with each other like a single, multi-headed organism. In the minds of the planners in Tehran, 12 of these drones represented a mathematical certainty. They believed that no matter how fast the Apache's 30mm chain gun could cycle, It simply couldn't track 12 targets coming from 12 different vectors simultaneously. They calculated that even if the pilot managed to knock out 9, the remaining 3 would have a clear, unobstructed path to the cockpit. But the Iranians had made a fatal error in their intelligence gathering. They were looking at the Apache's silhouette, but they weren't looking at its brain. The version Elias Thorne was piloting was the latest Block 7 Guardian, a machine that had been quietly refitted at a classified facility in Mesa, Arizona, only 6 months earlier. This wasn't just a helicopter anymore. It was a node in a global, integrated combat cloud. Its skin was embedded with hundreds of microscopic sensors that provided a 360-degree field of situational awareness, far beyond what the human eye could process. More importantly, Thorne's Guardian was carrying something the world hadn't yet seen in open combat: the Aegis-Light Directed Energy Suite. It was a high-power microwave weapon designed specifically to solve the swarm problem. While the Iranian general was waiting for a kinetic explosion, a missile impact or a burst of gunfire, he failed to realize that the rules of engagement had shifted from the physical to the electromagnetic. The history of the Apache is a history of adaptation. In the 1980s, it was built to stop Soviet tank columns. In the early 2000s, it was refined for counterinsurgency. By 2026, it had become the ultimate gatekeeper of the electronic frontier. Thorne knew every bolt, every line of code, and every thermal signature of his machine. He knew that the Iranians were relying on a doctrine of saturation, but he also knew something they didn't. You cannot saturate a system that moves at the speed of light. As the drones closed to within 500 meters, Thorne engaged the master arm switch. He wasn't looking for a dogfight. He was preparing for a digital execution. The arrogance of the IRGC was about to collide with the terrifying reality of American technological supremacy, and the result would be a lesson written in charged circuits and sinking debris. The lights in the National Military Command Center in Virginia flickered as the massive data stream from the Strait of Hormuz hit their processors. On the primary display, the thermal signatures of the 12 Shahed drones glowed like angry embers against the deep blue of the Gulf. Secretary of Defense James Miller stood in the center of the room, his arms crossed, his shadow stretching long against the wall of high-definition screens. He wasn't looking at the drones. He was looking at the live biometrics of Major Thorne, which remained eerily steady on a side monitor. Thorne's heart rate was a cool 62 beats per minute, the pulse of a man who was sitting in a garden, not a man seconds away from a mid-air collision with 12 pounds of high explosives. "Open a direct line to Bandar Abbas," Miller commanded. His voice was a low growl, devoid of any diplomatic softness. "I want the butcher himself. Get me General Aghaei on the secure override." 3 seconds later, a crackling, secure audio link bypassed the standard Iranian military firewalls, a feat of cyber warfare that should have been impossible. On the other end, there was a sharp, audible intake of breath. General Aghaei, surrounded by his own staff in the reinforced bunker, froze. He hadn't expected the Americans to have his private, hardened frequency. He hadn't expected them to reach out and touch him in his most private moment of planned triumph. "General," Miller began, his words cutting through the static like a scalpel, "I know you're watching your screen. I know you're counting the seconds until your swarm makes contact. I want you to listen very carefully, because these are the last few moments of your career where you still have a choice." Aghaei found his voice, though it sounded thinner and more strained than it had moments before. "Secretary Miller, you are in our territorial waters. Your pilot is an aggressor. We are simply defending our sovereignty with the tools at our disposal. 12 drones against 1 helicopter? The outcome is already written in the heavens." Miller's face didn't twitch. He leaned toward the microphone, his eyes cold and predatory, reflecting the tactical map. "The outcome was written 6 months ago in a laboratory you don't even know exists, General. You think you're hunting a bird. You're actually poking a beehive with a very short stick. Look at your telemetry. Major Thorn isn't running. He isn't even maneuvering. Do you want to know why? Aghaei looked back at his screens. The Apache was hovering, almost defiantly, in the center of the kill zone. The drones were only 600 meters away and closing. The general felt a drop of sweat slide down his temple, stinging his eye. He is trapped, Aghaei muttered, more to himself than to Miller. He is paralyzed by the scale of the threat. He's not trapped, General. He's calibrating, Miller replied, a dark, satisfaction-filled tone creeping into his voice. If those drones cross the 300-meter perimeter, I won't just lose a helicopter. You will lose your entire coastal radar network, your drone command facility, and every scrap of credibility you have left. Tell your operators to ditch those Shaheeds in the water now, or watch what happens when we stop playing by the rules of the last decade. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only with the white noise of the secure line. In the Iranian bunker, the operators looked to their general, their hands hovering over the control sticks, waiting for the order to abort. But Aghai's pride was a heavy, suffocating weight. He couldn't back down, not with his subordinates watching. He watched as the icons for the drones crossed the 300-meter line on the digital map. Major Thorn, Miller said, switching channels with a flick of his thumb, cutting the connection to the general without another word. The general has made his choice. You are cleared for the Aegis protocol. Sanitize the corridor. No survivors. Thorn's response was a single, terrifyingly calm word. Copy. The second Major Thorn engaged the Aegis-Light system. The air around the AH-64 Guardian seemed to ripple with a distortion that was invisible to the naked eye, but catastrophic to everything digital within a 300-meter radius. There were no cinematic fireballs, no thunderous echoes of anti-aircraft fire. Instead, there was a silence so absolute it felt heavier than an explosion. One by one, the 12 Shahed drones, the supposed assassins of the new age, simply stopped functioning. Their internal navigation systems fried instantly as high-intensity microwaves cooked their delicate circuitry. Their rotors slowed, their LED status lights flickered from a menacing red to a dead, hollow black, and they began to fall into the dark waters of the Persian Gulf like heavy plastic stones. In the Iranian bunker, the scene was one of total, frantic chaos. General Aghaei watched in horror as his tactical display turned into a graveyard of signal lost icons. 12 green dots, representing years of research and millions of dollars in investment, vanished in less than 5 seconds. The lead operator began slamming his fists against the console, screaming that the drones weren't responding to any override commands. The AI-driven mesh network, designed to be unhackable, hadn't been hacked. It had been physically erased from existence. Aghai's face, once flushed with the heat of anticipated victory, went ashen, then turned a deep, bruised shade of purple. He realized that the American Secretary of Defense hadn't been bluffing. This wasn't a skirmish. It was a demonstration of absolute technological obsolescence. The general's hands shook as he reached for the radio, but before he could speak, Thorn's voice broke through the emergency frequency of the bunker itself. The American pilot had bridged the connection using the Apache's integrated electronic warfare suite. General, Thorn's voice was as steady as a heartbeat monitor, chillingly devoid of adrenaline or anger. You are currently being tracked by a long-range targeting laser from my wingman, who is orbiting 10,000 feet above us. Your coastal battery at Cape Jask is also being painted for a strike. You have exactly 30 seconds to power down your active radar and recall your remaining patrol boats, or the next thing you see on your monitors won't be a lost signal. It will be the end of your command. The silence in the Iranian control room was so thick it was suffocating. The operators looked at Aghaei, their eyes wide with the realization that they were no longer the hunters. They were sitting in a stationary target. The general looked at the empty spaces on his screen where his invincible swarm used to be. He felt the weight of the 2026 geopolitical reality crushing his chest. The Americans hadn't just defended themselves, they had humiliated the entire Iranian military doctrine in a single, silent pulse. Aghaei didn't wait for the full 30 seconds. With a trembling voice, he uttered a single, defeated command. Power down. All units, stand down. Thorne watched the thermal signatures of the Iranian radar sites go dark on his helmet-mounted display. He didn't celebrate, he didn't gloat. He simply banked the Apache to the west, the powerful engines roaring as he accelerated away from the scene of the execution. Behind him, 12 expensive pieces of Iranian pride were sinking into the silt of the Strait, joining the rusted remains of every other empire that had tried to challenge the master of these skies. The duel was over, and the Predator was heading home, leaving nothing but a ghost of electromagnetic radiation in its wake. As the first gray light of dawn began to creep over the jagged peaks of the Musandam Peninsula, the physical evidence of the night's confrontation had already vanished beneath the restless, salt-heavy tides of the Strait. To a passing tanker, the waters looked as they always did, vast, indifferent, and deceptively calm. But in the digital war rooms of Riyadh, Tel Aviv, and Beijing, the shockwaves were just beginning to register. By 6 in the morning, the price of Brent crude oil had spiked by 4% before abruptly plummeting as rumors of the American technological sanitization leaked into the intelligence communities. The message was sent, and it was received with terrifying clarity. The era of cheap drone dominance was over before it had even truly begun. For years, the world's mid-tier powers had banked on the idea that they could bankrupt the United States through asymmetrical warfare, that a $10,000 drone could negate a $60 million aircraft. In 5 minutes of electronic warfare, Major Thorne hadn't just saved his own life. He had protected the entire doctrine of Western air power for the next decade. Military analysts across the globe began tearing up their 2026 procurement strategies. The swarm was no longer a silver bullet. It was now a liability, a cluster of targets waiting to be swatted out of the sky by the next generation of directed energy weapons. In Tehran, the silence was more ominous than any public statement could ever be. General Aghaei was reportedly removed from his post within 2 hours of the sun rising. The official state media spoke of routine technical exercises, but the frantic movement of Iranian naval assets back to their home ports told a different story. They had seen the hand of a superpower reach out from the dark and flick their pride away like a nuisance. The psychological scar left by that silent electromagnetic pulse would haunt their tactical planners for years. They realized that in the game of high-stakes poker, that is the Strait of Hormuz, the Americans hadn't just called their bluff, they had changed the very rules of the game while the cards were still in the air. The AH-64 Apache Guardian touched down on the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln just as the sun broke the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the flight deck. As the rotors slowed to a rhythmic, dying whine, Major Thorne climbed out of the cockpit. He didn't look like a man who had just rewritten military history. He looked like a professional who had completed a difficult but necessary shift. He knew that somewhere in the Pentagon, a group of generals were already downloading the data from his Aegis suite, preparing to refine the weapon for the next encounter. Because in the year 2026, peace is not a state of being. It is a constant, high-tech competition of wills. The Predator had returned to its nest, but the skies above the Strait remained under its watchful, electronic eye. We hope you found this deep dive into the changing face of modern warfare insightful. We are truly grateful for the time you have spent with us today, and your support is what allows our team to continue bringing you these detailed reconstructions of the world's most high-stakes conflicts. If you value this kind of reporting and want to stay informed on the geopolitical shifts of 2026, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. It may seem like a small gesture, but it means everything to the growth of our community. We would love to hear your perspective on this encounter. Do you believe the age of drone swarms is truly over? Or was this just a temporary setback for asymmetrical warfare? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you are short on time or simply enjoyed the listen, even a simple thank you in the comments would be greatly appreciated by our entire production team. Thank you for being with us until the very end.